unabashed,
the most unpredictable,
becomes a headline,
the most volatile,
outrageous behavior,
unsubstantiated narratives, a battle of personalities.
Welcome to Grand Tamasha, a co-production of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and the Hindustan Times. I'm your host, Milan Vaishnav.
For all their managing of the narrative and meddling with the politics, the powers lurking behind the scenes in Pakistan underestimated the PTI's popularity with the electorate. And what has followed is chaos. Pakistanis tuned into their news channels were watching their democracy being managed in real time.
Throttle of the UN High Commission for Human Rights. Some observers believe the biggest threat to Pakistan's democracy is the military. The army has ruled the nation for about half of its existence since Pakistan was formed back in 1947. And critics claim the military has already decided who will win power this time.
The February 8th elections have been marred by violence, mobile disruptions and delayed results. Serious rigging allegations have also been leveled by major political parties, throwing the country into further political turmoil.
Imran Khan and what the army wants, the army usually gets in Pakistan, but these elections, I think, have seen a very significant
Candidates backed by the imprisoned opposition leader Imran Khan have won the most seats in parliament, though they fell short of a majority. Khan supporters gathered outside the Election Commission in Karachi. They say vote rigging in Thursday's balloting denied them enough seats to form a government by themselves. Three-time Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, whose party...
Last Thursday, voters in Pakistan went to the polls in the country's first general election since the July 2018 election that brought former Prime Minister Imran Khan to power. In 2022, Khan was ousted in an unprecedented no-confidence vote and now finds himself behind bars. His political party, the PTI, was repressed with party members jailed, harassed, and eventually forced to contest the 2024 elections as independents. The military, widely seen as the guiding force behind these moves, appeared to put its faith in another former Prime Minister, Nawaz Sharif. The election results appear to have caught the military and perhaps many Pakistanis by surprise. At last count, independents backed by Khan's PTI emerge as the single largest bloc, capturing 93 seats. To talk about the election and what it means for Pakistan and the region, I'm joined today by Zoha Wasim. Zoha is an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of Warwick and is of this month a non-resident fellow at the Carnegie Endowment. She is the author of Insecure Guardians, Enforcement, Encounters, and Everyday Policing in Post-Colonial Karachi. I'm pleased to welcome her to the show for the very first time. Zoha, good to see you.
Thanks so much, Milan. Thank you so much for having me here. It's nice to be here and a very exciting time to be talking about the elections in Pakistan.
Indeed. I want to start, before we get to the here and now, by rewinding a bit. In 2018, PTI, the party of former cricket superstar, heartthrob, celebrity Imran Khan, emerged as the single largest party in parliament following that year's general elections. PTI would go on to form a coalition government with Khan as its prime minister, but just 4 years later, Imran Khan became the first prime minister in Pakistan ousted by a parliamentary vote of no confidence. So just to kind of refresh our memory here, tell us a little bit about who Imran Khan is and what led to his ouster back in 2022.
Sure. So basically, as I think is now well known, Imran Khan was brought in as prime minister in 2018 elections, which were also allegedly rigged to bring him into power. And he came with the patronage of the Pakistan army, the all-powerful army. And then almost two years ago, I think, so Imran Khan became the first prime minister in Pakistan's history to be removed in a vote of no confidence. But of course, certainly not the only prime minister to be removed from office before the term was completed. As is now well known, no Pakistani prime minister has ever completed their term in office thanks to the military's interventions and interferences. Very simply, his fallout with the military, sort of led to his ouster 2 years ago. And this Project Imran, as it's now popularly known, it was initially designed by the military establishment. It's said to keep Khan in power for, some say, about 10 years at least, so that he would remain loyal and compliant with the military and on the same page with the military. But this so-called unholy marriage of convenience, this unholy alliance, as people call it, it fell apart faster than could have been predicted. And differences began to emerge between Khan and his patrons in the army for a number of reasons. Firstly, there were differences over Khan's governance choices, primarily in Punjab, and the way he was managing domestic affairs and provincial affairs in bureaucracies and other domestic institutions. He was considered to be a bad leader. His governance was quite problematic. Him and his government led by PTI were not very interested in implementing policy changes and reforms. They were more interested in anti-corruption investigations and less interested in stabilizing the economy. So that was one of the reasons. The second was that the then Army Command General Bajwa and Imran Khan differed over foreign policy. Imran Khan was vehemently anti-America and anti-India in his stance, but Bajwa, it said, wanted a more conciliatory approach with India, and he wanted to maintain ties with the U.S., especially in a climate when the U.S. was losing interest in Afghanistan and Pakistan. They wanted to maintain some kinds of ties with America, but Khan was increasingly intent on pushing this anti-America and anti-India narrative in the country, which was becoming very popular and making things very difficult for the military command. And then third, and most importantly, the reason that led to the ultimate fallout is that Khan became quite confident and began meddling in the army's internal affairs. And as the story goes, he wanted to influence the appointment of the then DGISI, the Inter-Services Intelligence Agency, the premier intelligence agency of Pakistan. He wanted to influence the appointment of its chief, Faiz Hamid. He wanted Faiz Hamid to continue as DGISI, and because Faiz was allegedly one of the people who brought Khan, facilitated Khan's rise to power. But Bajwa, on the other hand, wanted to remove Hamid, and Khan was blocking those attempts. And I think this profoundly angered the army's high command, and thus the tears became the tears on the same page relationship became quite evident and quite problematic. And with these cracks emerging, the PMLN and People's Party, the Pakistan Muslim League Noon and People's Party of Pakistan, they had by now also formed an alliance, a sort of a coalition known as Pakistan Democratic Movement, or PDM, and they found, as this relationship between Khan and the army was rupturing, they found an opening for themselves, an opportunity to kind of become more presentable and palatable to the military at that time, and they began presenting themselves as better alternatives, more compliant alternatives than Khan. These sort of things happened simultaneously, Khan and establishment falling out and the formation of PDM, and then began the plan to remove Khan from office, which led to these conversations around the vote of no confidence dating back to actually 2021, but then those materialized in April 2022, which with the army's blessings, which finally led to Khan's removal from office, and his coalition partners abandoned him. There were defections from Khan's Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, his political party, and those defections led to members joining other political parties, including PMLN and People's Party of Pakistan. So this series of events eventually led to his ouster, and thus also began a sequence of cases and charges being launched at Imran Khan, and eventually leading to his arrest and imprisonment, and that's where he is today.
So after he was booted from office, Khan was arrested. He was later convicted on graft charges. Just a few weeks ago, he was convicted in a separate case alleging that he violated the country's Official Secrets Act by leaking the contents of a diplomatic cable shortly before he was forced out as prime minister in 2022. What do we know about the charges, and how much basis is there for them?
That's a great question, because there's so many cases right now, and as I understand, the last count said that there was an estimated 150 plus charges against Khan that have been launched over the last couple of years, actually. But I'm not going to go over all 100 of them. I'll just mention a few of the main ones that are essentially being used to keep Khan entangled in, Pakistan's legal and judicial system, and that are keeping him in prison and very much out of sight and out of mind, with the hope that he will sort of drop out of the public consciousness to a certain degree. The first of it, as you mentioned, is called the Cipher case, or it's known as colloquially as the Cipher case, and it concerns very much, this classified cable or diplomatic correspondence that was sent to Islamabad from Washington, D.C., the contents of which Khan made public and sort of allegedly waved that paper in the air at a public gathering. And he said that cipher, that cable, the diplomatic correspondence, was proof of an American conspiracy against Khan American conspiracy that was helping the military remove Khan from power. And then the case is essentially that revealing the contents of the cipher, of this cable, goes again, is in other words, revealing state secrets. And thus, under the Official Secrets Act, in a closed-door trial, he has been sentenced to 10 years imprisonment. I should mention the Official Secrets Act is a colonial-era legislation and very problematic, and his legal team do have a right to appeal. And there's an understanding that, through the appeals process, the decision may eventually go in their favor. But how long that takes, we're not sure. That's one of the cases. And then the few others that are worth mentioning, the second is known as is the gifts case, or the Tosha Khana case, which is basically, allegation and charges leveled against Khan that he has taken state gifts worth millions, him and his wife both, which he cannot legally do, and sold them. So him and his wife have both been awarded jail terms for selling these state gifts. But again, that case is likely going to be appealed as well. And the third and most problematic, the one I think that has gotten the civil society most agitated, against this repression directed towards Khan, is known as the Iddat case, which is very much about the period of divorce, the Bush and Bushra Bibi's marriage with Imran Khan, and whether it's even valid, because Islamically there's supposed to be a period of time known as the Iddat period that's supposed to pass before a divorced woman can marry another man, and the theory goes that period had not passed. So on Islamic grounds, they're trying to make this case. I don't think it's going to hold either, and I think there's a lot of anger. Civil society is very angry that this case has been brought. But I should say that all of these cases are kind of working together to sort of challenge this perception of Khan as a legitimate leader for Pakistan, right? I think that even though none of them will necessarily hold in the near future, and they will all be challenged, and eventually the charges may be dropped due to lack of evidence, but what they are doing is that they're creating a certain narrative, a certain picture of Imran Khan, right? The gifts case, or the Tosha Khana case is trying to project him as being financially corrupt. The Iddat case is trying to project him as morally corrupt and religiously, sort of questionable character. And then the third one, the cipher case, is trying to present him as being a threat to the nation and to national security. So I think these narratives have been really important, and that's why they're the cases are kind of coming in quick succession to present Khan as this, as a problematic figure and somebody who should just be dropped out of public conversation and consciousness. And I think that's what the establishment is trying to do via the legal route and via the judiciary.
So if you look at the past year, many PTI supporters have been arrested. Party leaders have been coerced into giving up their positions. The party was deemed ineligible to use its electoral symbol in these elections. Its candidates were forced to stand as independents. The simplest explanation, I think the one that is widely circling on the media and social media, is that the military simply decided Khan was a danger to the country. Khan was a danger to its interests. Now, this is obviously the simplest explanation. Do we think it's the correct one?
I think to a degree, that is what the establishment is trying to project Khan as, right? And they've kind of seen Khan to become quite problematic for themselves. I think that he was ultimately raised to be a populist leader, and then he became somebody who was undermining the army's position in the country and was weakening their position and status vis-a-vis the civilian leadership. And I think, therefore, what we've seen in the past couple of years, from the vote of no confidence to the elections over the past few days, is an interesting timeline of events unfolding. As you say, there's been a strategic kind of a situation of creating an unequal playing field by the military and the establishment to delegitimize Khan and present him as a threat and a danger to national interest and national security. And it's created a very repressive and non-democratic environment in the country. So, as you said, it sort of starts from the vote of no confidence when he's booted out of office. Even though in the by-elections in Punjab, he sweeps in those by-elections. But at the same time, cases start coming against Khan, and charges are being leveled against him. First, starting with the anti-terrorism law, and then later, eventually, he's disqualified from running for office for 5 years. And then there's been a number of attempts to arrest him, and then eventually in the anti-corruption case of a land, it was a case against a land being sort of bought, I think, and in that case he's eventually arrested on May 9th, which is when we see protests and violence and agitation on the streets, and the visuals are quite alarming, and his supporters are very angry, and there's an unprecedented violence that's an anger shown towards directed at military installations within Pakistan. And it gives the army a perfect excuse, a perfect reason and opportunity to unleash their wrath and unleash their vengeance against PTI and PTI supporters. And we see the leaders are being arrested, the supporters are being arrested, including women, on very trumped up charges. Many are jailed, many are tortured, many defect from the party. They start appearing on television channels saying that they're either joining another party or they're leaving PTI because of the so-called terrorism that they saw on May 9th, or they're just leaving, politics for good. And so you see that PTI, the party, is then systematically dismantled, and an environment of fear and intimidation is created in Pakistan in the summer of 2023. There was a period before that when it actually became quite okay for, members of the civil society and analysts and journalists to speak against the military even, and to name and shame and to, call out army leaders on TV and otherwise. But in this period of repression following May 9th, we see that becomes impossible to do. And there's a categorical, a strategic kind of, situation created that it becomes very difficult to criticize the military and talk about them very openly. And then eventually Khan is sentenced to prison on grounds of corruption. And that becomes one of like 150 cases, as I mentioned, against Khan, and creates a very good environment for Nawaz Sharif to return to Pakistan also, which is something that happens, I think, a few months after May 9th. He returns to Pakistan, and the stage is set for the next elections. And gradually what we also see is that while on the one hand, these cases are mounting against Khan, on the other hand, the cases against Nawaz Sharif begin to be dropped by the courts. And then in January, more recently, the Supreme Court scraps the lifetime ban on politicians, which clears the way for Nawaz Sharif to contest the elections. And then to just talk about a little bit more about how the unequal playing field was created in January. So it's just a few weeks ago, in the days leading up to the elections, we see another case concerning intra-party elections within PTI, which then lead to the symbol, the cricket bat, the party symbol of PTI being taken away, effectively banning Pakistan's Tehreek-e-Insaf from contesting the elections. So yes, there's been a concerted effort to undo Project Imran and perhaps pave the way for another hybrid compact in the country, with the Sharifs back in government and People's Party also present there. I should also mention on the question of whether Khan was a danger to the army. So there was this one potential danger he posed by becoming this populist and very popular leader, who was really resonating with the youth of the country and across classes as well. But there's also the danger of the kind of popularity he held within the ranks of the army itself. So not just in public consciousness, but also how he was very popular within the military itself. And that support that Khan held within and across the ranks within the army meant that he could influence matters internal to the Pakistan military, which became quite problematic because the military has always viewed civilian politicians as these corrupt civilians. So having somebody who could place checks and interfere in the army's internal matters was seen as a red line that no civilian politician can cross. And I think that's when it was decided that Khan had to go.
Hey, Grant the Masha listeners. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Putting this show together each week is a labor of love, but it takes a lot of work to put out a great show every week. If you'd like to support the work we do at Grant the Masha, please visit ceip.org/donate. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or on your favorite podcasting platform, so you'll be the first to know when a new episode rolls out. I want to just kind of bring this story up to the present, to Election Day. The day was, to sort of put it in very blunt terms, kind of a hot mess, right? I mean, there was a blanket shutdown of all mobile phone networks. The election results were delayed by many hours. There were all sorts of allegations about vote rigging, about various and sundry dirty tricks. I'd love to just hear your thoughts, Zoa, just on a kind of personal level, as you saw Election Day in Pakistan unfold, sort of, what was your mindset like?
I mean, it was definitely a grand tamasha, right? And it was definitely, it was very exciting. I think that it was also exciting because initially in the lead up to the polls, there was this idea that people weren't interested, that there was the momentum, the kind of, the energy that should be, leading up to elections, and the excitement, it wasn't there. Which made people seem quite disheartened and think that voters are not going to turn out, and this is already set and everything is very engineered and the stage has been managed for Nawaz Sharif to come back. And then once the results start coming in, the initial counting begins, the excitement comes because you're suddenly seeing that this is not going as predicted, right? This was certainly not going as per the military's plans, and everyone's appearing very nervous. Everyone's reading of the events leading up to the elections is completely out the window, and everyone has to kind of start from scratch and figure out what has happened, right? So I think that, certain things were very interesting to watch. One, there was certainly a low voter turnout in a lot of constituencies, and what that was supposed to mean was that if there was a low voter turnout, it would work against PTI's favor. It would work against Imran Khan. But actually, we saw that there was significant support, even though there was a low voter turnout, and it was made because you see, like when the party symbol was banned, a lot of confusion was created about which candidate you should be voting for and what's their symbol, right? And to make things further difficult for the voter on the day, the internet was shut down, mobile services were shut down, so people did not necessarily know always where they're supposed to be going and where their polling stations were located. Coordination became very difficult. So they tried to kind of make things very difficult on the day, and they were very confident that voters are not going to be able to cast their vote for PTI and Khan, but that's not the way it went. A lot of PTI, as you said, 93 or 95 of PTI affiliated candidates are now sort of have won, and this is in spite of the kind of environment of repression, and this is in spite of the fact that media were denied access to polling stations, observers were denied access to polling stations. So I think that there was quite a bit of surprise and shock on the day, and people were quite stunned. And everybody has said that perhaps the army and the military did not anticipate this. They thought that the various repressive tactics and censorship leading up to the day would deter the voter, but I think that was not necessarily the case. So all predictions were challenged on the day, and even though there was an unequal playing field, I think that PTI supporters and PTI workers found a way to kind of be very creative and improvise on the day and be able to kind of come out in favor of Imran Khan, and also show that they were quite frustrated with these cases and what the army was trying to do to kind of delegitimize Imran Khan was not necessarily working.
So I want to kind of separate out analytically two things, right? Because on the one hand, what you had and what you described so well in the weeks and months leading up to the election was a kind of fixing of the playing field, right? You basically kind of place your thumb on the scales in order to kind of bring Imran Khan and his party down, and maybe, do other things to prop up Nawaz Sharif and the PMLN and other sort of traditional mainstream political parties. That clearly didn't work, but there are many allegations out there about actual vote rigging on the day of elections. Can you tell us about how credible those allegations are? Is this still a source of controversy in Pakistan today, several days after the election?
Absolutely. I think there's been massive uproar against that, and I think the powers that be are trying to get Pakistan to kind of move on from it, and the Elections Commission and the Chief of Army Staff has basically said, accept the results, move on, be happy with what the Election Commission is saying. But I think you're seeing a lot of pushback from the media, a lot of pushback from the legal fraternity as well, because several of the independent candidates that were running with PTI support are lawyers as well, and they will be contesting these results in courts. I think it was very suspicious that I think there was a certain time by which the Election Commission was supposed to release the results, and that got delayed substantially. And I think it was very unclear why that was delayed, why the sort of releasing the results were delayed. There's been lots of reports about ROs, the officers who are responsible for collating the results, meddling, and changing forms, changing the number of votes, and just generally sort of delaying presenting the results. And then you see the way the numbers begin shifting over time after hours of delay. So I think there was certainly, a concerted effort, and people are not, generally, I wouldn't say none of the elections are, in Pakistan have been completely free from rigging and certain external interventions. But I think this one particularly just became really difficult because of social media, because of everyone just sort of coming out and, sort of watching how Imran Khan would be taken down and what would happen with his party. I think it's become very difficult to hide and sort of, overcome allegations of rigging.
I guess there's a question here, Zoha, about how surprised we should be. Because it seemed like if you were reading the press, the conventional wisdom was, this is a done deal. The repression of the PTI is going to work out. These traditional heavyweights will be propped up one way or another. But yet at the same time, there were clearly signs of this kind of undercurrent of popular support for Imran Khan. Tell us a little bit about, how we sort of missed this electoral earthquake. Did we just think that the fixing of the playing field would have been more competently or more effectively managed?
Yeah, I think this is something that analysts and academics both will be studying for a while. Like what exactly happened, in these elections, and how did we get here? What did we miss? And I think there's a number of reasons that we can think about or speculate, right? I think firstly, we may have underestimated the resilience of Khan supporters. I think everybody thought that in a climate of fear and intimidation, they're not going to come out. And if they're, confused enough, if, family members have been picked up, if they've been censored enough, Khan's name cannot be taken on television, his speeches are censored. There's so many ways in which the establishment had tried to kind of, suppress any kind of support for Khan. I think in that environment, we thought that the voters would not trust the system enough to even cast their vote. But I think that was not the case. I think that they underestimated Imran Khan's pull and attraction and the way that he inspires young voters in a way that PMLN has not been able to do. I think we also underestimated Khan's voters and supporters' creativity and improvisation, right? In spite of this repression, they found ways of using mobile phone applications to inform their voters where to go on the day of the polls. They found ways of communicating with their voters using, artificial intelligence and other sort of and other things on social and other tactics on social and digital media. So I think that, what the establishment was trying to do is, keep him away from the public eye. But PTI's supporters and members and workers were really crafty and creative in how to keep the conversation going and keeping Khan allowing Khan to keep inspiring voters on the day of the polls. And then the second explanation, perhaps, is that the military overplayed its hand. I think the army thought that using so much repression, using all these cases to delegitimize Khan would work in its favor. But I think at some point it started backfiring. And I think, the Iddat case was certainly one of them, is when people were just like, this was such a private matter and it should not have been, discussed in this way on television or in the courts. I think the quick succession in which the cases and were brought to courts and verdicts were passed, I think people began seeing through that a little bit, right? They began seeing through this kind of management and engineering that was happening. And I think that that did not work in the army's favor a little bit. And people were not able to endorse what the army was doing in good conscience. And then third, I think that the use of, I think PMLN and Nawaz also overestimated and became too confident in how popular they were, right? They did not campaign in the elections very proactively. They did not necessarily instill confidence in their voters. They failed to present alternatives beyond the Sharif family. So they, sort of kept playing up this dynastic politics. We started hearing about how it will be either Nawaz Sharif will be prime minister or Shehbaz Sharif will be Assembly, with Maryam Nawaz sort of also being positioned as taking a key position in the Punjab Provincial Assembly, as potentially she's started to be the next Chief Minister of Punjab. So I think that did not really appeal to the urban voter and the young voter. And I think Nawaz Noon League was not able to kind of calculate that properly, and they overestimated how much power they overestimated their own position in Punjab and in the country.
So I want to ask you about this issue of dynastic politics, which you alluded to earlier. And Pakistan, much like its neighbor India, has a long history of dynastic politics. In fact, it's quite a hallmark of South Asian politics writ large. Many of the major political parties in India represent family firms, and to a degree, the same has been true in Pakistan, certainly with the PMLN and the Pakistan People's Party of the Bhutto family. Do you think these results represent a backlash to this sort of politics? Can we be so bold as to kind of make that claim?
I think to a degree, perhaps. I think on the one hand, people are quite tired of dynastic families like Pakistan Muslim League and People's Party and People's Party, and they're quite tired of seeing the same faces because with such dynasties have also become we've seen speculations of corruption and other ways in which they've been involved in looting the country, and to put it very plainly, and they have not necessarily given back to the people. So I think the young voter, the urban voter especially, is quite tired of seeing this sort of this cycle being repeated with the same faces and their next of kin being brought into power. But on the other hand, I wouldn't necessarily say that that PTI is free from this kind of dynastic politics. I think while Khan himself is not from that kind of political background, many people in PTI do belong to dynasties such as Shah Mahmud Qureshi. So while PTI does not necessarily represent a true alternative to dynastic politics in Pakistan, the result does indicate that the average voter is a little tired of dynasties such as People's Party and Pakistan Muslim League. But countries like Pakistan, I would say, and especially politics in countries like Pakistan, it's still based around kinship, networks of patronage, and familial ties and familial relations. So I don't necessarily see a very transformational shift away from that kind of from this kind of dynastic politics playing out in the current configuration of politicians and political parties in Pakistan.
So I want to ask about one of the biggest and perhaps most difficult questions in the minds of probably listeners of this particular podcast, which is, what do these results mean, if they mean anything, for the future of India-Pakistan ties, right? It was interesting to see Indian Twitter during this election day, because there was a sense of sort of gloating, sort of kind of mockery that, this election is just a disaster from start to finish. And if you could only look at, your bigger neighbor to the east to see how elections are run. But there were other people actually cautioning against that sort of gloating, saying, look, instability in Pakistan, a real rupture between the civilian leadership and the military could be very dangerous. How do you see these results in the context of kind of the broader regional picture, with the caveat that we don't know how things are going to end? And we'll probably end with that. But what's your sense about the larger regional implications?
Yeah, so I think it all really depends. It's a complicated question to answer because it all just depends on what kind of political arrangement we will be seeing in Pakistan, and in the near future, what kind of civil-military relationship are we going to be seeing in Pakistan? Who will be the next? Well, first, who will be the next prime minister, and then who will be the next, eventually in a year or two, who will be the next chief of army staff, right? And that configuration, that compact, will determine foreign policy and regional relations as well. I think if we see in the near future, and we can discuss what kind of scenarios will play out, but I think if we see a Sharif-led government, a government that's led by PMLN, then perhaps relations with India might see some improvement, because PMLN and Nawaz Sharif in particular tends to take a more reconciliatory approach towards India. Similarly, People's Party may be open to more diplomatic ties and arrangements with India, but it may not necessarily be open to reconciliation. As we know from recent history, I think a year ago, Bilawal hasn't necessarily taken a very soft stance towards India and has called out the BJP government and Prime Minister Modi in the past. So I don't necessarily, that can go either way. If Bilawal is Prime Minister, Bilawal is Prime Minister, that can go either way. Importantly, we'll also have to see how the army chief, Asim Munir, what kind of stance he will take against India, and how much that will influence the way the foreign ministry and the next government acts, because he's known to Army Chief Munir is known to take a very hard line against India in the recent past. So even if a PMLN government, as may be the case in a few days, the PMLN government may take a reconciliatory approach towards India, but Munir may not be open to do that, in which case will the next government defer to the army when it comes to regional relations and matters with Afghanistan and India? I think that remains to be seen. Of course, if in the unlikely event, I think it's looking less likely now, if an Imran Khan-led government or PTI-led government comes into power at any point, we are likely to see, that they will not take a friendly stance towards India, because Khan has not been in the past very keen on thawing relations with India. So we will have to wait and see.
I mean, it seems like if one reads the Pakistani press, the most likely scenario is that you get a kind of rehash of a previous coalition government, some kind of marriage of convenience between the PMLN of Nawaz Sharif and the PPP of the Bhutto family. These are two parties that have no love lost with respect to one another, but might join forces to keep the PTI out, and of course benefit from the spoils of holding office, right? Which are pretty immense. If that is indeed what happens, and I should say that, jockeying to announce that coalition and who would get what position is already underway, what will the reaction of Khan supporters and these PTI-backed independents be? I mean, will its party members take to the streets? Could we see a real showdown, that could have implications for the kind of, Pakistani society between this very disgruntled, kind of insurgent movement, political movement, and the Pakistani military?
Yeah, so we'll have to see how things transpire over the next few days, because there's currently, like you said, there's been a lot of wheeling and dealing going on. People's Party and PMLN both are trying to poach independent candidates. There have been some defections, at least one, as of yesterday. I think the last kind of analysis suggested, or the prediction suggested, that the leadership of both parties have met and they've agreed to form some sort of a compact, some sort of a formula of a political arrangement, as they're calling it. And they're speculating at the moment that it might be a shared power arrangement, which might mean that we might initially see a government led by potentially Pakistan's Muslim League Noon for the first couple of years, or perhaps 3 years, and then the next one being led by People's Party of Pakistan, or vice versa. So I think it's pretty much established that the military wants both of these parties, both People's Party and Muslim League, to form the next government. So we are going to be seeing some sort of a power sharing formula or an agreement materializing this week or in the coming days. And I think that leaves PTI with several options and several strategies. So there has been agitation. We are seeing some anger on the streets. There have been protests. The police have been ordered to clamp down on those protests. And I think that's one of the strategies that PTI and its supporters will resort to, taking to the streets, protesting, perhaps protesting for a prolonged duration as they have in the past, reverting back to the days of their sort of container politics or dhanna politics. We may see some of that, but at the same time we may see at the moment PTI is talking to smaller parties with the hope that they can form a solid bloc as an opposition in the parliament. So that's another strategy that they will are likely to employ, is that they sit in the parliament in opposition and exert pressure from that arena. The third thing that might happen, so in addition to the protests on the street, in addition to kind of them forming a strong opposition in the parliament, what we're going to be seeing is also the fight playing out in the legal arena, in the judiciary, right? And because courts are going to be drawn into this sort of conflict between PTI and the establishment, and we're going to be seeing several cases being brought to courts to contest the results of these elections. So we're going to see some of that also. And then finally, what we might also see is that, Imran Khan and senior PTI leadership might eventually, perhaps, become more open to talks with the army as well. I wouldn't rule that past, even though there's been a fallout and they are victims of this new political arrangement being engineered by the army. I would not put it past Imran Khan to be open to some sort of talks or deals with the army should the time be right. But it all depends on whether Asim Munir or the next chief will be willing to even consider that. So a lot of it depends on how the arrangement is finalized over the next weeks. And then I reckon PTI will have a number of strategies at its disposal, and they will employ many of them simultaneously.
My guest on the show this week is Zoha Wasim. She is an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of Warwick and the author of Insecure Guardians, Enforcement, Encounters, and Everyday Policing in Post-Colonial Karachi. Zoha, I know it was a long weekend, many late nights. There's still a lot of uncertainty about what the future holds, but thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Grant Tamasha is a co-production of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and the Hindustan Times. This podcast is an HT Smartcast original and is available on htsmartcast.com. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to rate and review. It helps others find the show more easily. For more information about the show and to find the writing we mentioned on this week's episode, visit our website, granttamasha.com. Tim Martin is our audio engineer, and Mira Verghese is our executive producer. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.
This was a Hindustan Times production brought to you by HT Smartcast.
HT Smartcast.